Often talk about following Jesus, and we think probably maybe one of the first things we think about when we say that we should follow Jesus is following his example, being like him, sharing in many of his attributes and qualities, characteristics of goodness, those things. But there's another aspect of following Jesus that's just as important, and that means submission to his authority. Being obedient to him, not just trying to be like him, but recognizing him as Lord and recognizing him as someone we submit to. No, we're not. He is the boss of me. Okay, we can't play baby games with Jesus. Jesus is the boss of me. He is the authority, or should have the authority over our lives. Look in your Bibles this evening for just a few minutes at the book of Luke, chapter 7, and we're going to see a story about authority here. Luke chapter 7, beginning at verse 11, and there's a few aspects that I want to see, or you to see here in this text. And first of all is Jesus has the authority over what's clean and unclean. He is not going to be affected by life's normal conditions. He is the Lord. He is the Lord over it. He is the Lord who created it. And so what goes for me may not be really applicable to Jesus. Jesus is not just our good old fishing buddy, our brother, and on the same level. We're not on the same level as Jesus. There's things that Jesus can do that we can't do. Jesus has authority over what's clean and unclean. Another thing that you're going to see in this text is that Jesus has the authority over death. We surely don't have the authority over death. We're going to get, from time to time, we're going to get sick. We're going to get weak. We're going to have illnesses. We're going to have diseases. We have to go and get treatments at the doctor and all these things. We are delicate and fragile creatures. Jesus has the authority over death. And like I was talking about a while ago about submission, Jesus is going to have the last word over your life. And so he has the authority over your life. Now, here's the thing. I hate to bring in, just worldly sayings sometimes, but there's an old saying, we can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way, right? Well, I want to do it the easy way. And the easy way is just to simply recognize him as Lord and submit to him, instead of the hard way and the sad way and the sorrowful way of thinking that I'm the boss of me and Jesus doesn't have authority over my life. But then when I stand before him, I find out differently. Yes, he does have authority over my life. And so look at this little story here beginning at verse 11. Short little text, a very emotional and moving text though. Notice there that what happens here is that Jesus is moving from Capernaum, which is about 20 miles away, and you'll find that little story there in verses 1 through 10, and it's about the centurion servant who was really sick and ready to die, and there's some words about authority there in that story. And in fact, if you'll just look at a verse or two, you just kind of be reminded of this very well-known story. Look at verse 6, chapter 7, verse 6. Then Jesus went with them, and when he was already not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying to him, Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof. Therefore I did not even think myself worthy to come to you. But say the word. There you go. All you have to do, Jesus, is just speak the word. His faith is right there coming out, and he recognizes that Jesus has an authoritative word that he doesn't have. And my servant will be healed. Now here's what he's trying to say here in verse 8 is, what he's saying about Jesus is, you are a person of authority, because he says, I I also am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and my servant, do this, and he does it. And so the centurion understands the authority of Jesus. Now, you come here to this next little story in verse 11, and you hear more about authority. There's not much you can say about that Jesus, what he doesn't have authority over. Because if he can raise the dead, then he has all the authority that we can even imagine. So as Jesus moves from Capernaum, he moves to this little town of Nain. It's not believed to be a very big town. It's more like a village. And when he comes there, he's coming with his disciples, and it says a large crowd. Notice there in verse 11, now it happened the day after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him in a large crowd. The first thing I want you to see this evening is the compassion of the Lord. The compassion of the Lord. You know, we see the compassion here of Jesus. We see his, he's able to put himself in someone else's shoes and then desire the very best for them. He sees that someone is suffering, someone that is in pain, emotional pain. He sees sometimes in other stories physical pain. But it's often said in the Gospels about Jesus that he was compassionate. I said a while ago that there's some things that we can do like Jesus, and there's some things that we can't do like Jesus. This is one of those things that we can share in with Jesus, and that's his compassion. Now, I want you to see this compassion because we too are called to be like him in this regard. We are called to be compassionate like Jesus. And I'll tell you, the answer to your question is yes, you can. Yes, you can be a compassionate individual like Jesus. And so he encounters a funeral procession there. You see that in verse 12. It says, and when he came near the gate of the city, and I've read the background on this, the geography here. This was not believed to be a very big place, and so this gate is probably not as elaborate and as large as a larger city. It's probably just more for decoration, as one writer put it. But the point is that as they come near the city, they encounter something. It says, behold, a dead man was being carried out, and he's the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. Well, that's a great cause for some compassion because as you all know, a funeral is a very sad occasion. And not only is this just a funeral, look at the situation that we see here in verse 13. It says, or at the end of verse 12, he is the only son of his mother. So the mother has no other children. This is her only child. I've preached many funerals and I've heard many say that the hardest thing that a parent can ever have to do is bury their child. It is one of the most painful experiences of a person is to have to bury a child. And so that is what she is doing. And not only that, she does not have a husband. Her husband has passed away. I wish, and we don't have the answer. I just was thinking about this as I was looking at these things over the last couple of days. I really wish I knew the cause of death. I think that would be interesting. We don't know. We don't know if it was an accident. We don't know if it was sudden. We don't know if it was an illness that had been lingering for a while, and maybe the man had just developed a fever and died. We don't know, or an infection. We don't know. It would be interesting to know what was the cause, but we don't know. Nonetheless, it's still a tragedy that this woman is experiencing with the death of her only son, and now she is much like an orphaned parent. She is left all alone. In this day and age, they didn't have Social Security. They didn't have Medicare, Medicaid. They didn't have the social nets that we have the safety nets that we have in place for the government to help people in need. So when her son dies, that is her source of income, that is her source of living. Who will take care of this woman? Well, and by the way, I'm just reminded here just remembering about 1 Timothy chapter 5, when it says to take care of widows who are widows indeed. And so that would be something that the people of God would be obligated to help people like her when something like this happened. Notice there in verse 13, it says, and this is the Lord's compassion right here. This just really gets to it. When the Lord saw her, and I want to move slow because I think we need to take this in. He had compassion on her, and he said to her, "Do not weep." It's almost a little bit strange for Jesus to say, "Stop crying." And that's exactly what he says. It's in the present tense imperative, crying, and it's cease crying, stop crying. The Lord knows that she's upset, but what it is, it's a prelude to what he's about to do. He knows that what he is about to do will be the cause of her to no longer need to cry. He can already look ahead. I want you to see this tonight, is that whatever issues you are going through in your life, Jesus can already look ahead down the road, and he knows what is going to happen next. He knows what's right around the corner. And in this case right here, Jesus knows that it's appropriate for him. We wouldn't think it would be appropriate for someone to come up to a grieving widow who has nothing now, no children, to say, "Ma'am, stop crying." But Jesus can say that because he knows what's about to happen. But also look in verse 13. The Lord recognizes her pain. The little phrase, he had compassion on her. You cannot have compassion on someone unless you recognize that they are a hurting individual. Jesus recognizes her pain. He recognizes her hurt, and he has compassion for her. That's all that goes together. You don't have compassion on someone when everything's going good for them, right? There's no need for it. We only have compassion on someone who is in pain. And so not only does he have compassion, he responds appropriately, but he also sees exactly what's going on. I don't know if you've ever been there. I know you have. I say silly things sometimes. I know you've been there. And you've been in a painful situation. And you even sometimes might move to a stage of frustration because you don't feel like that anyone understands your pain. And you're right. A lot of people won't understand your pain. But I know someone who does. His name is Jesus. Jesus understands your pain more than anyone else. So may I give you a word of encouragement here? You do have someone that understands, but at the same time, you don't have to be frustrated because you're not alone. Jesus is there with you in this pain. Now I already went over that command. He says, stop crying, because he knows what's happening. The second thing, or what's going to happen, the second thing I want you to see, that's the compassion of the Lord. There's no one more compassionate than Jesus, but we can also share in that. The second thing is this, the word of the Lord. The word of the Lord is so powerful, it should not be dismissed. Notice in verse 14 and 15, you're going to see a miracle here. Then he came and he touched the open coffin, and those who carried him stood still, and he said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." So he who was dead sat up and began to speak, and he presented him to his mother. Well, 14 and 15, you notice there, and I see this in my mind in slow motion. You see this procession coming, and you see the pallbearers carrying, and that word, it might be in the King James, beer, B-I-E-R. That means stretcher. Most likely what this looked like was not a pine box, like what we would see, in the 1800s, a box, and they're carrying it or carrying it above their head, and they're walking in a kind of a parade. There would be a little bit of a parade, a little bit of a procession here, but here's what it would probably look like. It would probably look like a corpse wrapped in cloth, like a mummy, and laid up on a plank. And they're carrying this, and so you see this linen wrapped body, and you see it on a flat board or a stretcher of some type. So it's not an enclosed thing. And so you see the pallbearers there, and you see this. Jesus comes to it, and he touched it. Well, that's a big no-no. Because if you touch a body, you are unclean for 7 days. It's okay for Jesus because he transcends all of these things that are for us. And so he touches it. He comes. Now, do you see this also? Jesus reaching out. You see that? Isn't that good? That Jesus reaches out. Sometimes we get in such a big hurry, and I'm the world's worst at being in a hurry. I have too many things to do, too many places to go. My list of things is this, and I'm just trying to check them off, and I try to get it done. Jesus takes time, and he stops, and he gives this all of his attention, and he reaches out, and he touches the issue. He touches the problem. He puts his hand there. I read one writer that said they wondered if when he touched the stretcher that was what caused them to stop walking. In other words, as they were moving, he reaches out and stops it. It might have been that way. I'm not sure. But he does so. And then his word, he speaks to the dead man. So now he approaches, he takes time out, he reaches out, he touches it, but then he speaks. All these actions are in this story here. And Luke so skillfully does all that in such condensed words, doesn't he? Just in one little verse, all of that happens. And those who carried him stopped. You see that? There's a stopping here. They stop for Jesus. And like I said, it could be that Jesus stopped them. That's what caused them to stop when he touches it. He said, "Young man, I say to you, arise." He doesn't do some type of magic, abracadabra. He doesn't speak to some other force to help him. He doesn't use any other means other than his very word. His very word is all it takes. And on the first day, right, of creation, God spoke. On the second day, God spoke. On the third day, God spoke. His word has the power to create life. And he says, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And so he's speaking to the dead man. And the dead man in verse 15, look at what it says. So he who was dead, that's past tense. He was dead. That was his name 30 seconds earlier was dead man. And so because of what Jesus does, though, he is no longer dead. He was dead. And then there's two things that happen that dead men don't do. Number one, dead men don't sit up. And number two, dead men don't speak. And those are the two things that shows this change, this transforming power of the word of Jesus, is that he sits up and he speaks. And then you see the follow through is what I'm going to say in that last phrase with his compassion. He had compassion. And so now he finishes up the job by saying, "Woman, here is your child." He presents him to his mother. The last thing I want you to see, that's the word of the Lord. The word of the Lord is powerful. And now we're going to see the word of the people. Notice in 16 and 17, first of all, fear comes upon all of them, and they glorify God, saying, "A great prophet has risen up among us, and God has visited his people." And this report about him went throughout all Judea and all the surrounding region. In verse 16 and 17, you see this chorus of exultation. You see the glorification here of him. And they say two things. In verse 16, they say that a great prophet has been raised among us. I'm going to tell you why I think that they even talk about Jesus being a prophet, because they might be remembering what Elijah and Elisha did. Elijah and Elisha both raised the dead. They had a little bit different technique, but it was, one of them was a widow, and it was sons, and they both did that. So they are probably remembering the scriptures and saying, God is working. God has sent this man for a special purpose, and that's what a prophet is. A prophet is someone who's been sent by God. And so they recognize that. They say that in when they say a great prophet has risen up among us. This is a man of God. And then the second thing is this. They say God has visited his people. Very simply, they are giving credit and glory to God for what is happening here. And so they recognize God's involvement in this event. And then in verse 17, you see that this report, all of this stuff, it goes out and it's spread abroad among it says all the surrounding region, all Judea and all the surrounding region. I don't think that is even probably limited to Israel. I think that might have leaked out and probably is going throughout the world. Even at that time, there were people that were traveling. There were people that will be on the highways. Traders bringing goods from different parts of the world would be passing through, and word about Jesus is spreading. Can I encourage you or try to motivate you about something? What you see there in verses 16 and 17 about giving God all the glory, about recognizing who Jesus is, and about spreading the word, we should do the same. We should not be ashamed to glorify God. We should not be ashamed to lift our voices and sing about God. We should not be embarrassed to talk about Jesus among our friends and our family and among even strangers sometimes. You may have just a brief passing with someone, but if you think about it, if you pray about it, there'll be a chance for you to talk about Jesus. We should do the same, glorify Him. I talked to you a while ago about the clean and the unclean. Jesus has authority over that. Jesus has the authority over death, and He should have the last word on your life. But this is also, one more thing here, is that the dead being raised to life, it anticipates two future events. Two future events is what this is looking forward to. And the first one is this: Jesus will be raised from the dead. Jesus will be raised from the dead. And number two, believers will be raised from the dead. And in two senses, really. Ephesians 2:1 says that we were dead in our trespasses and sins, but we were made alive. So in one sense, if you are saved today, you have been raised from the dead to be made alive. And you are not going to die a spiritual death. But the second thing is this. One of these days, you're going to be raised in the resurrection of the dead. And you'll see that in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. I want to leave you with a couple of verses. And it's in John chapter 11. You know the story about Lazarus there. But Jesus said, just to put the icing on the cake tonight, about His authority over death and authority over life. Listen, these are just, man, you want to talk to someone about Jesus and eternal life. Go to John 11, 25 and 26. Just mark it in your Bibles, write it down, bookmark it, memorize it, whatever you have to do. This right here just answers all the questions. I don't know what there is to argue about, Listen to this. John 11, 25, this is what Jesus said. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. That's what Jesus said. I am the resurrection and the life. And then He says this, he who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. You talk to someone and they're fearing death. They're worried about a loved one that may be passing away. Read this verse to them. Share with them what Jesus' authority, how far does Jesus' authority go? Well, hey, it goes all the way, baby. It goes all the way. There's no limit to it. Look at this. And, verse 26, and whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Well, I don't know what else to tell people other than they have a decision to make. They can receive Christ and His Word, or they can try their own way. I'm going to ask our musicians to come, and we're going to have a song of invitation.